It comes with a PG certificate, I think. And It comes from the Blushing Lady. Thanks, Blushing Lady. Father Simon's, with enormous shame, I seek forgiveness from the hallowed Trinity. Father Simon, Brother Matthew, Sister Susie, offering penance from the pub. Shameful incident I am about to confess is a permanent blemish on my memory. Decided it's time to seek absolution for my sins. In my younger days, as a carefree traveller, I had visited the beautiful islands off the Turkish coast. Having eagerly booked myself onto a boat day trip, I clambered on board the Blushing Lady cruiser with my fellow tourists. I remember taking note of the unusual name of the ship as I stepped on board, not realising that later that very day it would be oddly prophetic. We'd enjoyed a magical day of azure waters and scorching sun. Circling in the more shallow waters of the bay, the smiling captain invited us to dive off the ship into the inviting ocean below. I confess, Father Simon, at this point I ignored my intuition, which told me this would be unwise given my history of watery experiences. Too torturous to go into here, and I belly flopped happily into the waiting waves below. The sheer sense of relief in having bobbed up above the surface of the water was soon replaced by a feeling of utter panic. I felt my rather generous chest break free from my bikini top, and I realised I had come adrift, so to speak.
Oh, goodness me.
Seeing all the other tourists floating around happily, I realised I would have to get myself strapped back in urgently.
Yes, you think you're blushing, Matt.
As I frantically fiddled with the fastening at the back of my top, I felt myself going under. In my mind at that moment, the choice was clear. I either drowned or swam back to the ship.
Oh, my goodness.
One more try, and I managed to secure my errant chest, and I swam back gratefully in the direction of the waiting ship. The still smiling captain was now waving the swimmers aboard, and there was a succession of tan bodies scrambling up the ladder of the ship to get safely back on deck. By the time I'd swum back, I was utterly exhausted with all the energy I'd exerted getting myself strapped back in. I hauled myself up the ladder, my legs like jelly, and a queue of mostly gentlemen behind me, waiting not so patiently on the rungs below. And this is where I must seek forgiveness from the Holy Trinity, as what happened next must surely be etched in the memories of all who were present at the scene. Through sheer exhaustion, I gave up the fight to climb up the ladder and squatted down heavily, sitting squarely on the head of the gentleman on the rung below. Not only that, the weight of the seawater in my bikini bottoms dragged them down too. So now the man had not only my wet bottom, but also my wet pants wrapped around his balding head.
Was that necessary? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He shouted at me what I can only assume was a profanity in a foreign tongue.
Yes.
As looking down at him, it was clear he had been temporarily blinded and muffled by both my bottom and bottoms. He'd nearly fallen off the ladder himself. He was waving one hand at me while trying to disentangle himself from my bikini bottoms with the other.
Oh, wow.
Wondering what all the commotion was, the captain, who was no longer smiling, leant over and gestured wildly at me to hurry up. At this point, the balding gentleman had freed himself from the tenacious pants and are now...
Seen them live.
That's a phrase I've never used before. And had now regained his sight and speech. He yelled at me again, and with a gargantuan effort on my part, I clambered up the remaining steps to safety, heading quickly to my seat on deck in the protection of my beach towel. I did not move again for the entire trip back to shore. Safe to say I've never revisited Turkey, nor have I, not that it's Turkey's fault, nor have I jumped off any more boats. Bikinis have not adorned my wardrobe from that day of shame onwards. I seek forgiveness from the most revered Trinity for the poor gentleman who'd been blissfully enjoying a beautiful day of sun and sea, and then temporarily blinded and muted by the bottom.
Blinded by them.
I would also like to seek forgiveness from the lady who gave her name to the magnificent ship we sailed in on that fateful day. I feel I have forever sullied the reputation of the original Blushing Lady, who is probably some pious sister who would never stoop to display such indecency, not once, but twice, in one day. Well, I humbly await your verdict and see what's going to happen here, Sister Susie from the pub.
Well, do you know what? That really made me laugh, and I feel for her because you go swimming and you just don't know what's going to happen.
No.
You can be a man or a woman, and you could, lose your swimmers, and then you've got to deal with the situation, Matt. And I'm sure you've been there as well.
Lose your
for that
swimmers.
reason, you might lose it. The current, it's you don't know what's going to happen. The elastic might be loose. Who knows? But I'm going to forgive you just for the image that's put in my head.
Brother from another gutter.
That is the best laugh I've had this week. I am going to heartily predict right now that this one wins the smart speaker tomorrow. Or put it this way, tomorrow's had better be very good to beat that. So I am definitely going to forgive. My errant chest, fabulous.